Kia ora koutou, ko Nick, toko ingoa. I've decided to make another little farm update. I like to do these update videos every now and then just to show what's going on, but also for my own personal record keeping, just to see how things evolve throughout the years and what the challenges are and what goes well, so I can learn from it. It's spring and everything's starting to really burst into life now. It's that time of year that starts to get really busy as animals are born, things start to grow really fast, and all the preparation has to be done for the main plantings of the summer. We've had some beautiful, glorious days like this. August and September were incredibly warm for those months, but in saying that, we've certainly had some wet weather too, and some horrendous winds, some of which have caused the odd tree to fall down and things. And to be honest, that's pretty typical of this time of year, to get some really strong winds, but man, they were blowing. Well, that was good. I've just been sitting here for a good 10 minutes talking to myself. My phone ran out of storage, so I've got to say it all again. Good warm-up. So we've just finished lambing with the sheep. I decided to lamb a lot later this year, just because we kind of being understocked, and I was really sick of rescuing wet lambs from cold, miserable weather, so the conditions are just a lot nicer for them to lamb in. And also, it just means that there's a lot more good feed for the ewes to eat as they're going through those last phases of pregnancy, so they can have enough nutrients and sustenance for growing the lambs. Last year we lost a ewe, Olive, to sleepy sickness, which essentially is when the ewe's not getting enough nutrients to her, so the lambs start to drastically suck it from her, and even like her bones. And that meant sadly she died and lost the lamb she was carrying. So I really wanted to make sure that the ewes had enough in them to lamb this year. I've also given a lot of the other girls a break as well. Just wanted a few less lambs this year and just make it a bit easier on myself and the girls. But of course, lambing's never entirely stress-free. I mean, the first lot that were born, Molly had twins, and she happened to have them still on a pretty cold, wet night. So I made the decision to move her under some shelter, just so the lambs could stay, dry and reasonably warm. And she was leaving her ewe lamb by itself because it was too weak to really walk or do anything. And I waited and watched and just, saw if nature would do its thing. But the lamb certainly was very weak and not going to make it. So I brought them inside, and that lamb was struggling to feed, so I gave it help feeding off Molly, and Molly was just an absolute legend the whole time. I think she knew I was trying to help, so she was really tamely letting me do it. Sadly, that lamb did die in the end. I managed to give it a few good drinks and thought it was doing really well, but then one day it just took a real turn for the worst and was just lost all of its energy, wasn't getting up, and wasn't drinking by itself either. And I actually discovered it had a case of bloating had formed. And what bloat, my understanding of bloat is, it's when bacteria such as E. coli build up in the digestive system and swell, and it's really uncomfortable for the lambs. There's a really high mortality rate for lambs that get bloating. I read like 75 to 100%, so the chances weren't looking good. It tends to happen in lambs that are weaker for starters and that haven't got enough colostrum in them, and I think she ticked both of those boxes. But also it's when they're in unsanitary conditions and are exposed to not so good bacteria, and I do worry I'm partially to blame for that. Bringing them into the shelter meant they were closer with the chickens, and chicken shit has, not good stuff in it for a newborn lamb, despite trying to keep them away from that. And I think just that combination of factors caused the bloating to happen. I sought veterinary advice. I tried to feed her little bits through a stomach tube and gave her an enema to get, all the bad poo out of her system, and also tried Greek yogurt, which has the lactic acid bacteria, to correct the balance of bacteria in her gut. But I just think that all the interventions were a little too late, and so I knew she was likely not going to recover, and made the decision to euthanize her because she was really suffering and in so much pain, and it was the right thing to do. So that lamb and one other little lamb that Flopsy had showed signs of iodine deficiency. And I had this last year, but it's when what you'll see is the thyroid gland is really big around here. So they have this big lumpy bulbous part around their throat. And that iodine deficiency does mean lambs obviously are deficient in an essential nutrient, and so don't tend to do as well. I tried to correct it this year. I've put iodine in all the water for the sheep, but it seems to just not have worked. So I don't know if they're just not drinking from the troughs enough or licking grass and getting their moisture through that way. But I think what I'll do next year is actually give them a drench of iodine when I put the ram over them, and also just before they lamb as well, and hopefully that'll help. So we had another set of twins, a single and what looked like triplets. Honey appeared to have 3 lambs, which I don't necessarily want because it's quite hard on the lambs and the mum. But I woke up and she was there with 3, and Flopsy had her 1 lamb the same morning, so I'm just not sure if it actually is Honey's lamb or if it was Flopsy's lamb, but Honey's mothering instincts while she was in labour kind of meant she semi-adopted it. Anyway, Honey had these 3 lambs and she was doing really well with them, feeding them all in those first few days. But then I started to notice that one was getting rejected by her, and I was going to do this anyway, but I came in and started topping up that lamb with bottle feeds, and over the few days Honey was denying it any milk, and so we now have a semi-pet lamb, and she's really sweet. She's doing well, trying to learn the lessons from the last lamb. I've been trying to feed her lots but a little at a time, because if I give her too much at once, that could also cause things like bloat. And the odd time I've also been including stuff like Greek yogurt, so she gets that good balance of bacteria in her gut, and she seems to be doing okay, fingers crossed. Flopsy had 1 lamb that had that iodine deficiency and was very small and weak. There was a period of time where I thought she really wasn't going to make it. She wasn't really feeding, and she actually got really bloated and had rattly breath, which is a sign of that things weren't going well with her. So I tried to take the lessons from the previous lamb that died. I tried to immediately get her in as clean environment as possible. I ended up making her an electrolyte solution which had molasses for some energy and nutrients, baking soda, salt for electrolytes, water, and Greek yogurt to get that better balance of bacteria. And I gave her that over a few days, once or twice, and also gave her an enema 2 days in a row, just with some warm soapy water and a gentle syringe, just to clear any bad bacteria build-up out of her system. She's running out there right now, looking a lot better, so I really thought she wouldn't make it, but I'm glad my intervention seems to have paid off. And so otherwise I'm just trying to really look after the ewes at the moment. They've got plenty of good tucker here to eat, nice clean water. I also bought them some nuts for some good protein and minerals, and a mineral block so they can get all the good stuff that they need. So okay, I've yabbered on about sheep for a while. talk all day about sheep, really, couldn't I? But otherwise, the other lot of animals on the farm are the chickens, and they are giving us lots of delicious eggs at the moment, many more than we can eat. So we're trying to give as many as we can away to family members and people we know. So they just get grains every morning and scraps, and they have this whole huge area to forage and roam around in. We have another rooster who was born from last year who will be destined for the pot, and I am keeping my eye out looking for Orpington cockerels, because Richard's had a few seasons here now and like to get a bit more diversity in the gene pool. The other accidental new addition to the farm is a wild rabbit. And yes, I know rabbits are considered pests and can be absolutely destructive for natives. But I was going on a walk and I found this tiny little thing in the wet and the cold, you know, by itself. And so I grabbed it and took it home. And I was left with the option to, I guess, euthanize it, release it back into the wild where it could have died a horrible death, or contributed to the problem of damaging natives and pasture land, or keep it. And yeah, I've kept it, haven't I? Her name is Dandelion. She's very sweet and friendly, and I didn't know you could tame a wild rabbit that well. And my hope for her is that she will become what's called a rabbit tractor, and this is often used in permaculture, where I'll have a movable hutch and use her to, I guess, mow between the garden paths and eat all the grass, and then she'll poop and I can scoop that into the beds, and that adds nutrients and fertility to the soil. So hopefully I can use this animal that's considered a pest to a really productive, good purpose for the farm. The food forest is something I really love. It doesn't give you the same immediate or reasonably immediate gratification as, say, annual veggie garden beds do. And that's just because perennials take longer to grow. But then when you look back, you do see the gradual progress that has been made, and it's just really starting to take shape. It's gonna be such an abundant place of fruit and food, but it just is attracting wildlife, which was one of the reasons for it in the first place, and it feels good for Mother Nature. I've also tried to duplicate the plants I've got and have managed to take an offshoot from a hazelnut tree, which is taken, and also some cuttings of the currants over the winter too, which seem to be growing now, which is good. Free plants. Otherwise, the veggie garden's in a bit of a ready to spring mode at the moment. The beds are being prepped. I've dug through, removing rocks and starting to add compost and suppressing weeds, but I haven't yet planted the main summer crops out, and that's just because there have been a few frosts, mild frosts in early October, and I like to just wait until we're well past the risk of those, because you don't really get anything out of planting slightly earlier anyway, because the veggies know when the conditions are right for them and when they want to take off and grow. So the veggies will be ready when they're ready anyway. So I might as well wait till that risk of frost has passed. I have been collecting windows of Facebook Marketplace, and I finally made a little glass house for myself for all the seedlings that will go in over the summer. And I built this, and then 2 days later we had just extraordinarily high winds that blew the whole thing down and smashed a side panel. But at least I didn't have veggies in there at that point. So I have gone back and repaired that side and dug a post in now and tied it to the shed, and it did manage to hold up against the strong winds that we had. It's really great because it means that the windowsills in the house aren't clogged full of seedlings, and I have more space to start more seedlings now as well. The windowsills are still a bit clogged, admittedly, and everything in there is at a good stage. It's sort of starting to hum away, and it'll probably be the right size and ready for when I want to plant it out in early November anyway. The earliest seeds I started were in August, and that's like chilies, capsicums and eggplants, just because they take quite a while to grow, and I started them on a heat pad in August. And then I've sort of only in the last month started sowing my main summer crops, and I'm doing another main sow now around the time of the full moon. It just helps me keep track of when to plant things. So one thing I have planted was potatoes that I saved seed potatoes from last year, but I might make a video specially dedicated to potatoes later on. What we do have in the garden at the moment is we're getting through the last of the purple sprouting broccoli and leeks. I'm letting the purple sprouting broccoli flower. I'm going to save seeds from it and use them for next year. It's important with brassicas, if you're saving seeds, not to have other brassicas flowering near them like kale or Brussels sprouts, because they are actually the same species and they might create some weird sort of hybrid. I mean, you could experiment and get something really cool, but it's best to keep the same species breeding. Well, they are the same species, but the same varieties breeding together. And then otherwise, the garlic is in the ground and coming up, and hopefully we'll get a better season for garlic this year coming, just because it was quite wet in the last year. One thing I'm also giving a go is trying to make my own fertilizer teas. And I've been doing a lot of reading into this topic and got a few books and stuff, and honestly I think I'm a bit more confused than when I started. Like there's so many schools of thought, like anaerobics bad, aerobics good, anaerobics fine. So yeah, I don't know. A lot of books swear by using a bubbler to ensure that the environment for the fertilizer tea you're making is aerobic rather than anaerobic, because that encourages more aerobic bacteria in the tea, which is kind of the whole point of giving the tea itself, is to give those good bacteria into the soil. But then other schools of thought go anaerobic's okay in soil as long as it's balanced, and a lot of soil conditions go from being aerobic and anaerobic anyway. Like if you have a big flood, the soil tends to go anaerobic because it can't breathe as well and get as much oxygen in. So I don't know, I'm confused by the whole issue, so I'm trying aerobic. Surely I can't go wrong with that. And I've been bubbling away a few nettle and borage leaves in some water with a cheap aerator I got off Trade Me, and hopefully this will really help the veggie garden and the trees as they need to pour their energy into growth for this growing season. I've also been trying to up my compost game a lot too. There's nothing you can get better than homemade compost that comes from exactly where you know it and with all the good stuff. I do buy in a half cubic metre of compost every year, but again, I don't actually know how good this stuff is. It claims to be organic, yet I find little bits of plastic and stuff all through it. Whereas if I'm making the stuff here, I know what's happening. I'm not going to give advice on how to make compost because I haven't cracked it myself and I don't quite know how to do it yet. I think the point at the end of the day is you want to try and get as much diversity in your compost and diversity in the microorganisms that are breaking it down, which then leads to the diversity in your soil, because that's the whole point of adding compost, in my view, is to not add dirt, but to actually add soil life. So that about wraps it up, and is a good summary of what's going on at the farm at the moment. Oh, the little lammy's just come to see me. Hello. Yeah, this is the little girl that has ended up being a pet lamb. She's very sweet and doing reasonably well at the moment. I'm yet to name her, so I've got to come up with a name for you, don't I, girl? But if you did make it this far, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy these beautiful spring days. Ka kite anō.